Pharmacy Times. Everything pharmacy, every day.
Yeah, so tuberculosis has probably been with us or a disease very much like it with us for around 3 million years. So it's been it's a long history. We didn't understand that tuberculosis was definitely infectious until 1882 when Robert Koch identified the bacterium that causes the disease. And then it wasn't until the early 1940s that we began to develop treatments for the illness. And then between 1945 and 1966, we developed several different classes of antibiotics and anti-TB drugs that are very effective. But then between 1966 and 2012, we developed no new drugs to treat tuberculosis. And that's a big part of the reason why we're in the mess that we're in today. When I started learning about TB in 2019, I didn't even know that it was the world's deadliest infectious disease. I had no idea that TB was still a thing, for lack of a better term. I thought tuberculosis was a disease that killed 19th century British poets, not a present tense phenomenon. I think the biggest surprise for me is that since TB became curable, we've allowed over 150 million people to die of it. That's such an indictment of the way we distribute resources globally and the way we develop and distribute new treatments for disease. Well, we have almost 10,000 cases of active tuberculosis in the US every year. You know, it's an airborne disease. Tuberculosis anywhere is a threat to people everywhere. Diseases, of course, don't know about political borders. But the key for tuberculosis is crowded living and working conditions. The more crowded people are, the more likely tuberculosis is to thrive. We have some limited evidence that maybe tuberculosis started to grow as a human problem during the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago in Afro-Eurasia. And we've certainly seen that TB rises as industrialization rises. So in 18th century England, for instance, about a third of all people died of tuberculosis as that country was industrializing. And we've seen what Vidya Krishnan calls TB's parallel journey with capital in outbreak after outbreak. Yeah, TB is a curable disease, but it's not easy to cure. And pharmacists are the people on the front lines a lot of times distributing the drugs that we need to cure TB. And it's often drugs that are given almost always drugs that are given in combination. Different treatment regimens have different orders of drugs, different drugs that you take every day in the first 6 weeks or the first 8 weeks. It's very complicated. It's above my pay grade, that's for sure. But the overarching theme, I think, is that we need to use our existing tools well, and we also need to be working on developing new tools. Well, I think the importance of completing treatment is really an important focus for pharmacists, not just when it comes to TB, obviously, but when it comes to any disease. It's really common to hear that one of the main factors driving drug resistance and death from TB is quote unquote patients failing to complete their meds. But as all pharmacists know, and as most patients know, it's really common, regardless of what you're diagnosed with, to fail to complete your medication regimen. I've experienced that. I have severe OCD and take two medications every day to control it. And I've stopped taking my medication a number of times, even though I know that that's life-threatening. And so I don't think TB patients are unique in this respect at all, but it's difficult. It's difficult to take medication every day for months. It's it's difficult to manage side effects. And it's difficult to take medication once we feel better, right? Like so many people stop taking their strep medication after 6 days because they feel better, even though they've been prescribed it for 10 days. And so I think pharmacists have a really important role to play in educating the public, both about one's individual health, but also about society's health. That one of the reasons we complete our regimen of antibiotics is not just for ourselves, but for our communities. The dismantling of USAID is catastrophic for the treatment of tuberculosis. The United States has long been the most generous funder of TB response in the world. And what we're seeing right now is untold number of people having their treatment interrupted. And I don't need to tell this to pharmacists, but when you interrupt someone's treatment mid-course, the chances that they'll develop drug-resistant tuberculosis skyrocket. And as a result, that's obviously personally catastrophic because it's much more likely that that person will die, but it's also societally catastrophic because it means much more drug-resistant tuberculosis that we're going to have a harder time treating is circulating in communities. We've already seen some of this in the United States. Some of the people who have TB in Kansas have drug-resistant TB. And we're going to see much, much more of it because we're just going to see much more drug-resistant tuberculosis throughout the world. And that really scares me and should scare all of us. I think the most important thing is to remember that TB is preventable, it's curable, but we also have long enjoyed a world. I mean, really, since the 1950s, 1960s, we've enjoyed a world in the US and other rich countries where TB is not a significant public health problem. But we only enjoy that world because of the efforts of public health officials, pharmacists, doctors in controlling and preventing TB. And we are rare in the world. Tuberculosis is still the world's deadliest infection. And I think that's really important to remember. And the progress that we've made is not guaranteed. It's not inevitable. It's not natural. And there's every possibility. And I worry, unfortunately, that we're going to see regression when it comes to TB. We're already seeing more cases every year in the United States. And I really worry that we're going to see a resurgence of the disease globally.